Well, welcome everybody. Thank you for being here this afternoon on a rather wet and miserable day. I'm Philip Hammond, and it's my pleasure to chair this GSF meeting. Before I introduce our guest speaker, I've been asked just to make a couple of housekeeping remarks. The first one is many thanks to everybody who's renewed their membership and to those who have joined GSF recently. If there is anybody here who enjoys coming to these events but isn't yet a member, we would urge you, please, to consider joining GSF, either in a personal capacity or through your organisation, business, whatever. It is vital. Paying members are the way that we keep GSF going. So if anybody's interested, please contact Jacqueline, who's standing over there at the side of the room. And the second thing that I wanted to just mention is our next event, which will take place in this room in 2 weeks' time on Wednesday, the 4th of February. Andrew Gilmore, who was 30 years British representative in the United Nations, rising to Assistant Secretary General for Human Rights, will address us on the following question. Is it possible to pursue an ethical foreign policy in an era dominated by Trump? A kind of thought process that may find some continuity with what we're going to hear today, I suspect. So if you're interested in coming along to that one, please pop it in your diary. Invites have just gone out, so RSVP if you would like to come. Now, it is my great pleasure to introduce Lord McDonald, who I still think of as Sir Simon from my days in the Foreign Office. Simon had a distinguished career in the Overseas Diplomatic Service, culminating in a period as ambassador in Israel, then a stint in London as foreign policy advisor to Gordon Brown as Prime Minister, and then as ambassador to Berlin at what was quite a critical time for UK-European relationships. And that's where I first encountered him when I was Foreign Secretary in 2014. Simon then came straight back to London and took over the Foreign Office as permanent Undersecretary and kept me under very good control for the following 18 months until I moved off elsewhere. Simon is going to speak to us about the topic du jour, I suppose you could say, with a diplomacy, changing diplomacy, the outlook for 2026 and beyond. I'm told that the President of the United States will rise in approximately an hour, no doubt to respond to Simon's comments in Davos. Simon, please, we look forward to what you have to say.
Thank you very much indeed. So what Philip left out was that he chose me to be his permanent secretary, so I can say thank you. When Jacqueline first suggested that I give a talk, we chose what we thought would be the blandest title, but actually it feels as though it is the subject of the day. Because it is the subject of the day, I only decided what I was going to say in the last 24 hours, so you will see no notes. There won't be many jokes or much humor in this either, so I felt the need to start with something unexpected. One of the other topics of the moment is Nobel Prizes. And I happen to have in my pocket a Nobel Prize. Have you ever seen one? So it is the medal given to one of my predecessors as Master of Christ College, Cambridge, in 1957. Alec Todd won the prize for chemistry for his work on synthesizing vitamin B12. He was one of the last individuals to win the whole prize. When he died, he left us his medals. But when they include a Nobel Prize, it's pretty cool. So that is what a Nobel Prize looks like. Of course, Donald Trump is rather obsessed by Nobel Prizes. And most of what I've got to say is about Donald Trump and the very strange, different, challenging, powerful personality that is Donald Trump. When he was president first time, he was learning the ropes. He was quite surprised to be president. I see a former ambassador to the United States in the front row. I've heard him say that even though there was a relentless momentum in the end to his campaign, it wasn't the most seriously planned presidency. So for a lot of the time, he was kind of busking and getting used to the system and being frustrated by the personalities that the Republican leadership imposed upon him. Second time round is rather different. He knows what he wants, he knows where the levers of power are, he knows who he can trust, and he is just going for it. The domestic scene is not particularly good for him at the moment, so foreign affairs is taking more and more of his time. We're very shocked, I think, in the international community by what he is doing, but I don't believe we should be surprised. Everything he is doing, and I'm going to talk mostly about Greenland, he has telegraphed in advance. So he first laid his claim in 2019, and he repeated it at the beginning of his second administration a year ago, and it surfaces from time to time, but always he comes back and with more vigor. So today, European leaders are going to meet Donald Trump, or some of them are, and they have a very difficult choice, in my view. There are three, I think, basic choices. The first of them is the one which has been chosen by our own government. I understand why Sir Keir Starmer is going the way he is, but I do not think it will work. Basically, there are three elements right now to British policy. We support the rights of the Greenlanders and the Danes. We say repeatedly that the future of Greenland is only for them to decide. We are aware of the interest in retaliating, but we are trying to calm that down. We don't think that matching tariffs with tariffs with more tariffs would be a good and sensible way forward. So we are trying to reduce the temperature. But in so doing, we're kind of denying ourselves one of the few policy instruments that might cut through in Washington. And we're reminding ourselves that in the end, the United States is our key security partner. So, in the end, we'll probably line up with them. As I say, I understand why the Prime Minister is doing this, but I don't think it's going to be effective because I don't think it will cut through in the Oval Office. There is nothing in it to command the attention, still less the respect, of Donald Trump. So I offer two alternatives. One, a realpolitik alternative, which is difficult, but I think has a chance. And the second, more bracing, where we acknowledge that fundamental beliefs, fundamental ways of behaving have shifted, and we need to get ahead of the consequences of that shift. So my realpolitik policy would be that we recognize the case that President Trump is making. And there is a case, a substantive case. The Arctic is increasingly important and the geopolitics of the world. For two principal reasons. One is climate change, that a place which was frozen solid is now navigable for a significant part of the year. And second, we have more and more interest in and need for rare earths and other minerals. And the geologists say that Greenland, the world's largest island, has a lot of these desirable rare earths and minerals. So President Trump looks at the globe and sees that there is this huge landmass, which at the moment is notionally under the control of Denmark and is inhabited by 57,000 disgruntled Greenlanders. One of the things that's kind of surprised me in the last couple of weeks is this idea that the Greenlanders are happy Danes. They are not. They have been chuntering for more autonomy for the last 2 generations, and they've had a substantial degree of autonomy since 1979. They are flirting with the idea of independence. They want a different standing. But there are 57,000 of them. I will return to that point before the end. So it is an important place strategically, and the present management can't really take care of it. Because, and this is increasingly important because of the interest of other great powers in that part of the world, particularly Russia and China. I visited both Greenland and Iceland. Iceland for professional purposes as a PUS, and Greenland when I retired, so there was, public money did not have to pay that airfare. It was a fascinating place to go. There's not very much going on, but there was a lot of Chinese interest and activity in both places. The conversation I had with my Icelandic opposite number was nearly all about China, that they want a foothold in the high north, and they're prepared to work hard and pay dear to get it. So all that nexus of concerns, I think, is legitimate. So then another thing, because we're dealing with Donald Trump, is legacy and his view of history. And his personal background. So I don't think he knows a great deal of history, but he does know about the expansion of the United States. And to this point, the single biggest expansion of the United States was the Louisiana Purchase in 1803 under President Jefferson. More than 2 million square kilometers. No other president has come close. It is a fact that Greenland is about 26,000 square kilometers bigger than the Louisiana Purchase. So if it became American under the presidency of Donald Trump, he would be responsible for expanding the territory of his country by more than any other person in history. I think that appeals to him. His background is real estate. There have been lots of negotiations, apparently, between Danes and Greenlanders and Americans in the last 10 days. The Danes and the Greenlanders have been completely shocked that no matter how generous the offer on basing, on access to the mineral wealth, the Americans are just not biting. They want title. They want it to be American, and I think that is partly the real estate background of the president. So there's method in this ambition, and it is also a brutal fact that if the Americans decided to go for it, neither the locals nor European NATO could, or I believe should, resist. 57,000 people won't last 2 hours in the face of an American invasion. The Europeans thought signaling would make a difference. And so last week, a group of Europeans, including one British naval officer, went to Greenland to show solidarity. They're all back in Europe now, and the immediate effect of that gesture was to provoke the president into saying he would apply a 10% tariff on everybody who was involved. So, we won't be able to resist if the plan, which I am sure is now being developed by General Dan Kane, is implemented. And if you have any doubts, I refer you to the Caracas operation of 2 weeks ago, which, whatever you think about its legality or sense, was militarily breathtakingly efficient and effective. So if they decide to go, they will get it. Recognizing that, one option is for us to cut to the chase. The European allies will tell the Danes, look, this is the price we have to pay for the continuation of NATO. If there is an invasion, the only thing I think I know for sure is that NATO ends that day. An alliance cannot withstand one of its members invading another. So we mustn't get there. And NATO is that valuable to us that we must collectively make a sacrifice, that we must reconcile ourselves to the fact that the Americans will take Greenland. And what you must do, Denmark and Greenland, is to get as good a bargain as you can in that negotiation. And as long as it is a negotiation, they will have some cards. They will be able to get maybe money, maybe continuing access to the mineral wealth, and maybe the Greenlanders will be able to get US citizenship. But this will only happen if we act in advance, if there is a proper negotiating process. If it's later, if it's post a US invasion, well then he won't feel the need to concede anything at all. Difficult, but I think the most realistic option now available. But there is a braver course. And this course, I think the starting point is that NATO is finished in any case. My main enthusiasm for the second course is that we need to keep NATO in being. Still, in 2026, the Americans provide 40% of defense capabilities within Europe. So we are rather reliant on the United States. This president is a maverick. He's very difficult to deal with, but he's only going to be there for 3 more years. So we need to get the Ming vase through the next presidential election, and with a new administration, NATO is in with a shout. So as I say, that's the underpinning of my realpolitik. But if you think, well, no, it's already over, then other options can and should be considered. And the thing here to stress is that Donald Trump hasn't appeared out of a clear blue sky, that it's not just about one man thinking that the United States is doing too much for the continent of Europe. We must look inwards, we must look at ourselves and acknowledge that 80 years after the end of the Cold War, and 8 years after the end of the Second World War, 35 years after the end of the Cold War, to have the Americans so prominent in our continental defense doesn't make basic sense. And my conversations with Americans across the political spectrum indicate that this is one Trumpism that is quite widely shared. So Europe needs to do more for its defense, so Europe can be a bit more muscular now in its dealings with Donald Trump and not take it. Say that we will not accept force majeure in Greenland. We will send more troops, but the idea is signaling we're not going to fight you, but we want you to know we are serious, and we're going to appeal to other parts of your system. Although this is an imperial president, he is not the only power center in Washington, that the Senate and the House and the Supreme Court could be played in. This is extraordinarily high stakes for a diplomatic effort, but America, as well as its president, needs to know what is at stake. I think we can only undertake such a brave course if we think it through. And part of the thinking through is that our bluff may be called, that the US may leave Europe more rapidly than certainly I hope, and that we will need to do more, expensively more, for our defense rather quickly. But that too is a conversation I think we need to have in the United Kingdom and in Europe. It is absolutely true that we spend less on defense than when Margaret Thatcher was Prime Minister. It is absolutely true that the world is a more uncertain place. So the idea that we can get away with the levels that we spend right now is something that needs to be challenged. Of course, this is politically very, very difficult because the economy is not growing. The only comfortable way for a government to increase spending is using extra income. With growth pretty much flatlining, extra money for defense has to come from somewhere else. The most obvious somewhere else is the welfare budget, but that is the politically most sensitive. I note that last year, this government tried a measure to slow down the increase in the welfare budget and failed. So they weren't even able to do the smallest measure. And what I'm talking about is very much bigger than that. But when the stakes are high, we should look at the big and most difficult options. Just a couple of points to finish. One is about the Greenlanders. You know, one thing that really puzzles me in the end is why we attach so much importance to the views of small groups of people whose wishes can only be fulfilled by other larger groups of people spending enormous sums of money. It wasn't always the way. It has become the way, and I think it's a principle that is ripe for re-examination. There are certain British cases or cases of British interest that come in scope if that prism is applied. And second, and I know it's been pretty gloomy so far, but I think the idea of snapback, of the status quo ante waiting for us in January 2029 is a mirage. Too much is happening, too much is changing for us just to tread water and try to outweight this problem. So that's the last reason why I think that Sir Keir's policy won't work, because I think that is its essence, that he is trying to keep things just in play for the rest of this administration in the hope that something better will turn up. I don't think that is available. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Simon. Very thought-provoking and apposite comments. I mean, I think the last point you made, that we have to make a decision whether we're going to treat the current situation as being a permanent change or perhaps even a reversion to the norm. After 80 years of engagement, the US goes back to being isolated and perhaps rather more corrupt in its political systems, or whether we treat it as a transient phenomenon. That seems to me to be a fundamental challenge. You've answered that point. You've made clear the way you think about this. But I'd like to just challenge you on another thing. If we go down your number one option of appeasing Trump on Greenland, why would we think that the same warning that we apply in relation to Putin doesn't apply to Trump? We say of Putin, you cannot appease him because he'll just come back for more. Why do we think that if he gets Greenland, he won't simply pivot his gaze onto something else?
It's a very fair point, and I refer everybody to the excellent speech made by Mark Carney, Prime Minister of Canada, yesterday in Davos, because he can see that Canada is next on,
exactly,
pretty high on the list of Donald
It's also a big landmass.
But there are key differences. You know, 'cause Canada has a say. Canada has a large population. The United States would have to do very much more than just send in the 82nd Airborne to take over. And I think lots of other Americans would get involved, and it would be identified as an indigestible meal. Just, by the way, the fact that we're discussing the US takeover of Canada kind of boggles my mind, but we do have to look at least the theoretical possibility. But the key difference, Philip, is that players like Canada and Ukraine are big enough to have a say, whereas Greenland is not.
All right, fair enough. Let me just put one more question to you, and then I'll open it up for questions from the floor. You talked about the US as our key security partner, and then you posed the question of whether or not NATO has a future, whether it's already gone. Seems to me we need to look at this at two levels. The Europeans, of course, have to do more for their defence, and in conventional defence, the Europeans can do more if they make hard decisions and choose to do so. But can they really deliver their own strategic defence? And is not the doubt that the President has already sown enough to effectively end Europe's strategic guarantee from the United States? Isn't it gone already?
I mean, this is enormously important and enormously expensive. But I think even there, with a grown-up starting confidential conversation between, at first, Keir Starmer and Emmanuel Macron, but very quickly involving Friedrich Merz, you have to look at the possibility of a European deterrent. Right now, one of the things that is, in the balance, one thing that I think continues largely because President Trump doesn't know much about it, is the British nuclear deterrent. I mean, of course, there's lots that's top secret, but what is not top secret is that our deterrent relies for the continuous goodwill of the United States. If that were withdrawn, I think our independent deterrent would be in trouble very quickly. So either we have a non-nuclear future, or perhaps we have a European nuclear future. Because the dirty little secret in Paris is that much the same applies to the French deterrent, that we both need the United States. If the United States was not there, then the bill would be enormous. But if it's a European bill and it's Europe's collective decision that that is part of being one of the top 3 or 4 players, well then that's a conversation Europe must have.
And in any case, even on the non-nuclear side, Europe will face 2 big challenges. One is finding the money, which will mean cutting social spending, very difficult to do in a democratic structure. And the other is finding the manpower. Indeed. The Ukrainians can't mobilize the manpower they need when they're under existential threat. I think we're going to find it challenging. But let's open up to the floor. If you want to ask a question, if you could raise your hand so I can identify you. When I come to you, if you could give your name, and if you're representing an organization, your organization. And please don't put the hands down while I jot down some names. Jacqueline, can we start with Malcolm Rifkind, who caught my eye about 3/4 of an hour ago?
Thank you, Simon. Thank you, Simon. That was a brilliant presentation, if I may say so. I think the most important point for me that I heard you say was that if Trump occupies Greenland, within a day, NATO is dead. And that is a very important remark, not just for the future of the Europeans, but surely also for the future of the Americans themselves. I don't normally quote Frederick the Great, but he once remarked that diplomacy without arms is like music without instruments. Now, one of the things that makes America so great militarily is that the president is commander-in-chief of the world's most powerful military alliance, far ahead of any other military capability of any other part of the world. Do you think that Trump is unaware of that? Or is he just so reckless that knowing that he will cease to be the commander-in-chief of the world's most important military alliance, which helped win the Cold War, that somehow is less important than his personal enthusiasm and ambition to be the man who delivered Greenland?
It's a very important question. I often find that children's stories are quite good guides to adult behavior. And one of them is Brer Rabbit. And where Brer Rabbit is, don't do something, don't do this, because that's the worst possible thing to do. And it turns out that that's exactly what Brer Rabbit wants to happen. And I suspect that President Trump has thought this through, and that if NATO is split asunder, he intellectually and politically can cope with it. I draw a distinction between him and the United States, but I think one thing we've learned about him is he is very much focused on himself.
I think we can all agree on that. To save Jacqueline's legs, I'm going to come to the front again.
John Everard, I'm a former diplomat. We're talking about seizing or not seizing Greenland as kind of black and white options. But of course, there are grey areas, aren't there? I mean, a Puerto Rico model, Marshall Islands. What's your take? Do you think Trump might be satisfied with a halfway house, or is it all or nothing?
I think that's one reason why the Danes and the Greenlanders have been shocked, that I think quite a few halfway houses have been offered and rejected. Another curious fact is that under existing treaty arrangements from the 1950s, the United States can station up to 10,000 troops in Greenland without informing Copenhagen or Nuuk. Now, this is pretty generous. So it indicates to me that it's not, in the end, about the security relationship. It is about ownership.
Lady in the, second row there.
Hello, thank you. My name is Kati Laus. I'm the Deputy Head of Mission of Estonian Embassy here in London. I was very interested to hear your views about appeasing Trump over Greenland, and reassured by your view that Canada would be too large of a bite for him. But in light of that, I think you agree that we are also teaching a lesson to everyone else, teaching a lesson to Putin, to all the other dictators around the world, watching this unfolding very, very clearly. So what words of comfort or reassurance can you give to Estonia, population size 1.3 million, that we are not giving a lesson, that please do continue and do continue with smaller nations in particular, whose right for territorial integrity is somehow less valid?
Okay. No, I can give three comforts to Estonia. The first two are related. Estonia already is a part of the European Union and a part of NATO. And I think that gives Estonia protections. No, Greenland is not part of the EU. And anyway, Estonia is a member of the EU, is contiguous with other member states, and has NATO troops already stationed there. So you have the right treaty arrangements. I admit that that is not necessarily sufficient. But the third comfort, I hope, is the proper comfort, which is that Russia finds itself overextended in Ukraine. The Ukrainian war was supposed to be wrapped up in 3 weeks with a victory parade in Kyiv, and 3 years later is still going on, or even 4 years later is still going on. So Mr. Putin and his forces have their hands full. There are some generals in the audience. You've got to finish what you've started before you can plausibly undertake a separate, very difficult operation. So I hope that that combination will give some comfort to Estonia for the next few years.
Gentleman at the back there.
Thank you very much for the amazing speech. My name is Human. I'm a PhD researcher on financial crime. I focus on Russia, China, and Iran. Given London's role as a global financial center, how should the UK diplomacy, regulation, and intelligence sharing adapt to the countering money laundering by hostile states and sanction evasions, particularly if US cooperation becomes less reliable? Thank you.
Well, this is a rather different subject. Yeah, I still believe in the rule of law and international law. And so I think part of what the United Kingdom has to do is get better at enforcing the rules on international finance. A little vignette, if I may. At the end of David Cameron's time as Prime Minister, he organised a summit in London focused on corruption. And the then Prime Minister was rather dismayed to find out how big a problem the United Kingdom was. So I think, there's quite a lot of that blindness around this city. So taking our existing responsibilities more seriously would be a start.
David Howe.
David Howe from the House of Lords, representing nobody in particular. Wonderful, clarifying, stimulating. But one thing that wasn't in your comment was any mention of what might be called the architecture of 1945. Out of the rubble of the Axis defeat, we created a brand new whole set of treaties, including the United Nations itself, the GATT, as it was called then, the International Monetary Fund, the International Court of Justice, and so on and so on. A long list. They're all in trouble. They're all weak. They're all disrespected. None of them have got the real trust. And they are the referees and the rule makers and rule upholders, which you so strongly endorse, of the world. Why did you not talk about that, and what more can we do to contribute to the rebuilding of the world institutional architecture, particularly on the monetary side, the sort of things Keynes dreamt about, but also actually right across the board?
Okay. I meant, no disrespect, it was just space. But the international architecture remains important, but as you say, is under pressure. The single most important for me was the Security Council at the United Nations, a body which can make binding law for all its members. The Security Council hasn't really functioned since 2008, since the Russian invasion of Georgia. There was a brief moment that was better in 2011, for the Libya operations, but the Russians basically have blocked everything. So it's there and it's important, but it's been in trouble for quite a long time. And now these troubles are magnified because we have competing new initiatives. President Trump doesn't like the existing international order and is at a cost of $1 billion play, new countries can join him in a new effort for a new security architecture. So we'll see how that one goes. And the Chinese are not happy with the existing architecture. The brilliance of the framers in 45 was to include the Chinese as one of the permanent members. The brilliance of Nixon and Kissinger in 1970 was to change horses from Taipei to Beijing. But that is all they think they've got. In every other part of the United Nations, they feel underrepresented and underpowered. They're doing really well in elections for things they care about. but there's a possibility of the Chinese leading an effort to have new or parallel structures. So there is a lot of work to do. I would much more reform what we have. I think, however good what we have is, it needs quite a lot of attention. And one of the things, difficult perhaps for this room, is that the United Kingdom is not the power it was in 1945. And there's aspects of this which are a zero-sum game. So if the Chinese are going to have more, somebody else is going to have a smaller quota or whatever. And we are on that menu along with the French.
Indeed. There's a gentleman at the back row. That's it. Yeah.
Yes. John Peet from The Economist. Your presentation was sort of based on the, I think, correct assumption that we in Europe have very few levers to pull against Donald Trump. And that is very obviously true in the military field. But nevertheless, as we discovered in April when he first announced very large tariffs on the rest of the world, within
Liberation
days,
Day,
he had to drop them because of the response of the financial markets. And some people have been pointing out that the United States still runs a large trade deficit and a large budget deficit. It needs to sell its debt. Total holdings of US treasuries in Europe amount to something like $8 trillion. Do you think we could use that to perhaps apply some pressure on him?
I think there comes a point in a debtor-creditor relationship where if you hold too much of someone else's debt, you find that you are even weaker. So I don't hold great hope for that, John, but the bond markets are clearly influential. And so, that at some point will play a role. But this is moving really, really fast. It is quite possible that even today, things will happen in Switzerland that people write up in history books a century from now. So I think what I'm talking about is moving as like a juggernaut.
The problem for the bond markets is, if not US Treasury paper, what? What do you put your $8 trillion into? European Union, euro-denominated bonds, Chinese bonds? Gentleman here.
Peter Snow, happily retired. You've alluded to it already, the Board of Peace. What do you think Trump's up to? Is it just an attempt to undermine the UN, or has he got something? First of all, on Gaza, and secondly, more importantly in many ways, on trying to sort of include Lukashenko and everything else.
I think he's trying to undermine the UN. If I were advising the British government still, I would encourage them to keep their distance. Anything that Trump founds is all about Trump. And then that, by definition, means it's not rule-based and you're not able to control it.
So it's useless?
Well, for Trump it may be useful. I don't think there's any use for us.
Gentleman by the pillar. Yeah.
Hi there. Hello. Stuart Wood, Labour Member of the House of Lords. Do you think that the rapid change in the NATO, perhaps the disintegration of the post-45 logic of NATO, changes the argument for British engagement with Europe? The Brexit debate was fundamentally conducted in terms of an economic and trade argument and a sovereignty argument with the background of security that NATO would continue. Does the possible disintegration of NATO make the argument for British relationship with Europe a security argument now more than a trade and economic argument?
Yes. If I were advising, the country immediately that I think we need to work closely with across the board is Canada. And I think Canada and the United Kingdom together approaching Europe is a more comfortable configuration for the United Kingdom doing it by itself. But I mean, that's deeply personal. But again, deeply personal. It turns out that we turned our back on our continent just at the moment when the main alternative was changing its mind about us.
It is a fascinating thought, isn't it, that if Canada were to become the 51st state of the Union, there would never be another MAGA administration elected, ever. I have suggested to Mark Carney that maybe Canada needs to take one for the team.
I think if I may say, I think it's more likely that Canada becomes the 28th member of the European Union.
Gentleman in the back block, yeah, there. Thank you.
Hello. Henry Hogger, newly established Centre for Strategic and International Governance. You didn't say very much about Russia in your talk, specifically at least. As you know, of course, a lot of the commentators are tending to say that all this bust-up over NATO is primarily playing into the hands, in fact, of both Russia and China. It's a bit of a what-if question. What if the conspiracy theorists have a point that what Trump is doing is actually, to some extent, at the behest of Putin, because of a feeling that he owes him an allegiance for putting him into office?
Henry, I'm just not going to go there. Just not going to go there. I think all I will allow myself to say, because I would never, ever imply that the President of the United States were a Russian intelligence asset. But one does have to ask oneself how his behavior would be different if he were.
Yes.
There's
there, behind you, Jacqueline. Oh, and behind, okay. After that, behind you, 2 seats behind you, yeah.
Hi, Alex, DL student. So you're talking about the if there were military action against Greenland, American capture would be inevitable. But simultaneously, you know, America is not good with dealing with casualties. Well, Trump has the same regard for human lives as Putin, and so therefore could deal with probably 200 and 300 losses.
No.
Could the American public deal with that same amount of loss? And then also, how would they actually hold on to Greenland? If there is some kind of ideology behind the capture, it is arguably the 21st century of manifest destiny. But what would the actual American game plan be? And can the American public really take on, let's say, 400 losses? Even though militarily that's not many, for the American public that might be 400 many too much.
Yeah. One thing where I disagree with you is that I do not think that Putin and Trump have the same attitude towards casualties. Clearly, Putin has been able to withstand in excess of 1 million Russian dead and seriously injured since the full-scale invasion of Ukraine. Trump hates casualties. He hates American casualties in particular, but casualties distress him. One of the impressive things about the Venezuela operation was there were no American dead. I'm pretty sure I can look you in the eye and say Kane can deliver Greenland without bloodshed. I talked about us, sort of beefing up Greenland as a signal to the United States, but I do not think we should fight for Greenland, especially not against the United States. Because to adapt Chancellor Bismarck, Greenland is not worth the bones of a single British soldier.
But the challenge, Simon, would be if the Americans did act on Greenland and we do not make any attempt to defend it, what happens afterwards? Do we act as if nothing has happened, or do we actually impose a series of sanctions, penalties? And what if we don't? What signal are we sending to Xi, in particular, and to Putin?
All very important points, but it's NATO's finished. If there's a military operation against Greenland, NATO's finished. So Europe has to get together the next day to discuss its new, different, sovereign, to borrow Macron's word, security arrangements. So something very dramatic happens immediately. Whether we decide to sanction the US, I don't know. I'm not an economist, but I note that competitive tariffs were part of the 1930s backdrop. So, needing to send political and security signals might not mean collapsing the economic relationship.
There's somebody just behind. Yes, that's right. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. Dominic Carratu. Fascinating discussion, fascinating lecture. a fourth possibility. Trump's clearly in power, very much driving it, his real estate background, his ego, whatever. But do you think that all Americans, all Republicans necessarily subscribe to that? And therefore, is the fourth way the fact that you may get, whether it's Powell standing up on the Fed, or even some of the Republican congressmen, start sort of passing the Anti-Greenland Invasion Act and trying to rein him in, question mark, even impeaching him?
Well, you know, the rest of American politics is a big part of my third option, but I suppose my summary is don't hold your breath. I went yesterday to Speaker Johnson's talk to members of the Commons and Lords, and it was a terrifying presentation. They're lined up with their man. They believe in their manifest destiny. They think most things that happened since 1960 were a mistake, and they're turning back the clock. And this feels quite general in the Republican Party, certainly the top Republicans. Other people may emerge. And on Powell, one thing I know is that he won't be in office after May.
We won't be in office as chairman.
But I think his term expires.
He's entitled to remain as a governor if he chooses to do so. Well, let's see.
Thank you very much indeed. Ewan Grant, UK Defence Forum, but speaking in a personal capacity. I am the named source for the Times article on President Trump and parallels with presidential candidates being compromised. Graham Masterton's 1980s book, Icon. But my question is related to the late Clive Cussler's, I think, 2012 book, Poseidon's Arrow, which is about rare earths. What consequences do you think of a takeover of Greenland would there be for the countries in the global south regarding their critical mineral and rare earth assets? Thank you.
I think the consequences will come in this respect quite slowly, because even if the geologists are right, these rare earths will be difficult and expensive to extract. So one of the main motivations may turn out to be quite difficult to deliver. So if there are consequences, I think they would be revealed over years or decades.
Okay, John.
Charles Vivian. Sorry, hi. Thank you very much indeed. It was great. Building on following your comments about the European Union, to what extent has leaving the European Union hindered or helped Starmer in giving him some latitude in his diplomacy in relation to this issue?
Well, it has clearly helped our Prime Minister last year. That I think the Brits, because we were not in the European Union, were treated in a different way by this administration. So the sort of, supping I mustn't call him the devil, supping with Trump, that's gone okay. But now it's more serious. And so I think not being in the room is a penalty for the United Kingdom. But I note that, even though we're not in the room for lots of discussions, we are in the room for the really important discussions still. And one example is that the political director at the Foreign Office, we feared that it would be sort of cast into outer darkness when no longer part of the EU. But the key grouping still is the E3. So Berlin, Paris, and London on all of these issues still coordinate very, very closely.
Robert.
Bob Walter. Now, Trump has said that Greenland is vital for the security interests of the United States. In the last 48 hours, he seems to have woken up to the fact that the Chagos Islands are also vital to the security interests of the United States. Now, you may take this question lightheartedly, or you may take it as a serious question, but should we become transactional like Trump and offer to sell him the Chagos Islands and spend the proceeds on our defense budget?
I know there are some very great Chagos experts in the hall. Right, a couple of thoughts. First, the reason why Trump signed off on the deal a year ago was that the British government was able to explain to the President of the United States that the deal guaranteed this key asset for the United States for the next 1.5 centuries. And I think that was what he was mostly focused on, and that's a good thing. This week, that's not the key thing. The key thing is raw power. And we, who've done the deal, are very conscious of international law and are complying with judgments from the ICJ and things like that, and doing right by the Chagossians. And that's why I think it is still a very good deal. But to have the main beneficiary of the deal tell us that we're stupid because of it, it does mean that there's part of me tempted to say, well, okay, you're so brilliant, over to you. You can take this on, because it is, in the end, all about the United States' defense interests, not ours.
I have to say, I don't agree with President Trump on very much. ... Gentlemen.
Thank you very much. James Cunliffe, TAG International and former soldier. If I may respectfully just challenge you on your general hypothesis that Trump is actually, when you look at him, he's really a disruptor. He's not really serious in a lot of what he's done. He was going to drain the swamp in Washington. He was applying huge tariffs last February. He's even offered to come to the help of the Iranian protesters. I mean, even with Venezuela, it was only a raid. It wasn't an invasion. The idea of an invasion of Canada and Greenland is so... it was almost unbelievable.
So the idea of
It's very unbelievable. The idea of an invasion of Canada or Greenland is so unbelievable, because you've got to build up your forces, you've got all the logistics. So he's disrupting. He's not really serious on the big issues. That's my...
Well, I'm afraid I just have to disagree completely with everything you've just said. He is a disruptor, so I agree with that bit, but the disruption is having massive consequences all across the world. The whole world knows about Donald Trump. The whole world is thinking about Donald Trump. He's challenging so much that we'd assume to be immutable, and he's doing it with effect. I simply disagree that Greenland is not a doable military operation. It's very, very large, but there are only 5 towns with a population bigger than 2,000 people. This is a very straightforward invasion for the 1.3 million Americans under arms. It's Canada, I agree, that is different. But no, Trump is the most consequential president of my lifetime.
Well, on that note of disagreement, which is, after all, what we're here for, I'm going to draw this to a close, because we do promise that these events finish at 2 o'clock sharp, because everybody's got a busy schedule. Simon, thank you very much for putting into sharp focus some of the questions that we have to ask ourselves as we come to terms with this new world that we live in. You've made clear your view that it is a permanent shift or return to a norm rather than a temporary aberration that we can somehow batten down the hatches and sail through. I think it's probably becoming increasingly clear that that is the case, and that presents some very big challenges for Europe, some very unpalatable challenges for a population that has got used to believing that all of the proceeds of what little economic growth there is can be shoveled into increased social spending. That will not be the case for the next 20 or 30 years. And that's going to present some real challenges for a democratic system in which the beneficiaries of this social spending largesse are also the masters of the political class that governs them. And that, I think, is going to be where democracy itself is tested against other systems that are more able to take difficult decisions in long-term national interest. So we need, I think, we will have this will not be a debate that ends anytime soon. And there will be many other people sitting in that chair, Simon, I'm sure, following in your footsteps with their thoughts. But thank you very much for a thought-provoking and very interesting analysis of the situation we face today. Now we can all scurry away and listen to what the President's got to say. Thank you very much, Simon.